cover just some of the real basic overview information regarding the event to catch everybody up to speed. Then I'm going to ask Carolyn to briefly touch on the campus, and we've got a slide for that in terms of how we're all going to find this event inevitably. And then after that, we're going to turn it over to the guys with Honeywell to really give all the meat and potatoes, if you will. So how to enter, we've got it up here on the screen. Each team must submit an application. There's an application process to be a part of this. Very important. We need to know team names, quotes for each team, the student's name, and a coach name for each team. And then we also need to know t-shirt sizes. As soon as possible, each participant will receive a t-shirt. Then we'll get a letter of commitment, a team photograph, and then we'll be doing some media release forms relevant. We want to get that stuff as soon as possible. It helps make Katie's life easier the sooner we get this stuff, but our deadline this year is Friday, November the 15th. So hopefully that still gives you some time to make the final decisions, but also get everything in order. Next, moving right along, the dates for the preliminary event will be consistent with what we did last year, which was a rave success. The event will be Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, February 3rd, 4th, and 5th at the ASU Polytech campus. Like I mentioned earlier, we'll hear from Carolyn regarding. First 50 teams that enter are guaranteed their first date of choice, so you get to pick when is best for you and the students. From there, we'll do our best to fit everybody's needs, but it becomes a little bit of a puzzle to put together and make sure we don't have too many teams one day and too few another. Competition begins each day at 9 a.m. and should wrap up by approximately 4. We ask people to be there as close to 8 as possible for registration and the logistics. So if you've got to plan accordingly to be to the Southeast Valley, what I call the Southeast Valley, we hope that everybody can be there by 8 each morning, or on the dedicated morning. Each day will be pretty similar, pretty cookie cutter in terms of how one day will look versus the other. We'll have a registration, which the Fiesta Bowl assumes responsibility for. The judging is all done by Honeywell and their crew, and they do an outstanding job. There's a whole array of different entertainment that we bring in. You know, last year I remember the Magician was quite the hit with all of the kids, so we're responsible for that. We've got a great sponsor in Culver's this year who is sponsoring and donating lunch, so that we don't have to worry about anybody bringing in lunch. We provide that. And then there are awards and finalists and some fun stuff done from stage by me and my assistants each day. So next, I'm going to ask Carolyn to either come on up or from right where she's at, just give us a little bit of an overview. For those.
So the biggest thing is that you're going to be on this campus. We are still looking at narrowing down some spots. How many in here were here last year? Okay, so a few of you were here last year. We have a variety of options this year of where we might be. The gist of the conversation is you're going to be in the back side of the campus one way or the other. We will either be in the Union or our Sun Devil Fitness Center. But when you come on campus this year, the main thing is when you come into the center campus, there will be signage right there at the center roundabout, and it will clearly state Fiesta Bowl, Honeywell Fiesta Bowl event, and it will direct you on the north side of campus to our activity of parking. Your parking will be on that end of campus, and it will have clear parking signs for you. We're going to have some really clear instructions this year as to what to bring as far as food goes, and we're going to have some outside areas where the students can have their stations. So like bringing like a soccer pop-up tent so you can kind of make a station outside to kind of hang out and be there instead of kind of underneath the tables like it was last year. It got a little crowded, a little hot. So our goal this year is to give them some outside space to run around in and to be able to be outside and be a part of that. And so there'll be some clear signage and lots of areas for you guys to be able to hopefully let them run around and exercise and get some of their energy out in between their competitions.
With that, I'm going to turn it over to the guys from Honeywell to kind of start off with a contest overview and let us all know what we've gotten ourselves into. So Bob, the floor is yours, sir.
What Keith and I are going to do is we'll go through, I'll cover the structure of the contest, and I'll go through these pretty quick. A lot of these are pretty self-explanatory. Keith will then go through some of the specifics around judging, some project specifics, some examples, and then we want to really throw the floor open to questions that you may have, and then we can offer at least some insights, not some like insider things on how to score well, but just some insights that we've seen over the years of things that work well, things that don't work well, and some messages that you should have as well as messages you should pass on to your kids and their parents. So with that in mind, you can see this is for 5th through 8th grade students. I don't say anything on there about parents really participating in this activity. And believe it or not, it's really easy to tell when the parents have. It's actually humorous somewhat because we get these projects that are they're stellar, right? I mean, in terms of craftsmanship, right? It's not what this is about. 5th to 8th grade, teams can be from 3 to 5 students, and their project, as far as what they have to actually build, is to construct a scale model of an international lunar base, international. And they have 2 missions that they're going to be doing this year. The secondary mission is different for those of you that have done this in the past. First one is to mine helium-3 as an energy source. And there probably are some of the teacher coaches in here that don't know what helium-3 is. I guarantee you that for kids that haven't done this before, a lot of them won't know what it is either. And that's all part of our cunning plan to get kids to go out and learn some new stuff. And the other one is to describe a lunar positioning system. How do you find your way around in 2 dimensions on the moon? This is like a cool engineering design project. The base has to house a crew of up to, operative word here, up to 50 people for 2 years. I think some of you have probably seen this, so again, I'll try to go through these quickly. And then, if you have questions, raise your hand and just blurt them out. Each project should include a physical model that can be no more than 1 meter on a side. And the reason why we do that is so that we can get them in and out of doors. There's nothing that would disappoint your team more than to bring their project to school and have us not be able to get it in the building. Okay? That's why it has to be no more than 1 meter on a side. It doesn't have to be a meter. Okay? They have to do a mission patch that can't be bigger than 30 centimeters, which is about like that. They'll do both a presentation, a written presentation, and a display board. Okay? And this written report that they do would also include any scale model drawings that might be needed, so text and drawings. This is a really important one, and we end up getting a number of people, despite the fact that we talk about it, and I know that it's very clearly called out in the guidelines. This is not intended to be the school with the most money wins, okay? Or the parents that make an argument that something really valuable that they were throwing away, which was worth nothing, got used in the project when it might have been worth hundreds of dollars. Okay, that's not what it's about. I can tell you that when the judges judge these things, what they're looking for is creativity and critical thought. Those are probably the 2 biggest things they're looking for. Obviously, craftsmanship has a play, but when it's good craftsmanship that's within the reasonable domain of 5th through 8th graders, then that's what's operative here. And the reason why I brought up the comment earlier about parents is you guys are going to be the primary conduit through your kids and their parents to let the parents know this is not their project. I know you guys probably deal with this when you give kids projects and something comes back and you know that parents and the kids spent the whole weekend in the shop. It's not what this is about. Okay, but $50. There's an intent here, right? People can monkey around with this. I would really advocate that you guys can do a lot to make sure that the intent is clear to both the kids and the parents, right? This isn't about a little wink thing, okay? Physical presentation is going to be a model scale drawings, big emphasis on using recycled materials. We love these for obvious reasons. The mission patch and the lunar base name. Base design requirements. These are the things, and again, it's called out in more detail in the brochure, but just to give a feel for the kind of things that we'd be looking for on virtually any base is going to be a habitation module. And anytime on these where you see module, you can put an S in parentheses there if you want to. Okay? Some place for the people on the up to 50 people to live, a place for them to work, some kind of transportation system. That's totally wide open as to what they do there. A landing launching site, since there will be some connectivity back to Mother Earth. Some source of power and some plans for what to do in the event of an emergency. Or an emergency obviously will require them to do some critical thinking about what kind of emergencies might they have to deal with on the moon. That might be similar to what happens on Earth, or maybe different. Like we don't have to worry about windows blowing out and losing our source of oxygen, for instance, here normally. Okay. Physiological factors. These are just some things to consider. Atmosphere, food, water, waste, gravity. Make sure, please, this is one of those important safety tips. Every year we've got at least a couple projects where when we talk to the students, they'll say things like, well, we did X, Y, Z because there's no gravity on the moon. Really? Okay? It's different, but it's not zero. Shielding. Okay, the fact that there is no atmosphere on the moon says that there are certain things that you need to shield for. And again, that's finding out about that is all part of the learning for a lot of them. And then what's their base location as far as where they put it on the moon and why. One of the things, even though the big emphasis here is on a lot on science, technology, engineering even, this project, and one of the things I think is really neat about it is it's broader than that. And it's really meant to be inclusive. So even some of the kids that maybe aren't totally attached or that aren't totally involved from a kind of a STEM perspective can still participate and have a very meaningful participation on doing this project. So some of the societal attributes that you want to have on a base like this are also what we're looking for. So it's already going to be multicultural. That's why we say these things have to be international. Okay? So what are the job assignments? What's the structure going to be? Okay? What if it's going to be multicultural? What are we going to do about communication? What about arts, music, etc.? Things that we know and love that really don't have anything directly to do with engineering. What about medical care? Because people are going to be up here for 2 years. And some methods for recreation. In the past, we've had recreation as a secondary mission. This year, it'll just have to be covered as part of the main base design. Let me pause for a second. Any questions that pop into people's minds, especially some of the new people? And by the way, those of you that have done it in the past, your insight in particular is really valuable. So if you have any ideas, thoughts you want to pass on, feel free. Yes?
Going back to shielding, you guys make a point every year talking about enforcement.
Yeah. Yeah. You're making up stuff just because somebody saw it in a science fiction movie and saying that's what we're doing, and then carries so much weight when you get these working engineers in the room looking at projects, right? So if somebody says we're going to have some Star Wars-like force field that's going to repel anything that might come in, including, UV radiation and all that kind of stuff, ain't going to work, okay? So if they're going to have stuff, make sure that it's at least based in science. Good point. Same thing with things like, we're going to have anti-gravity shoes. That might be a great idea, but then there needs to be a little bit of science behind it, because judges are going to say, so how are you going to do that exactly? And if they don't know, that they just kind of made it up to deal with trying to get around gravity, it's not what we're looking for. Other questions so far? Okay. So going back to the primary mission, it's really to provide a mining site and a structure to mine helium-3, okay, which is an isotope of helium. That's very, very rare on Earth. It's more common on the moon. And so if there are some people here that are business related, right, the real business value here, the business opportunity is to be able to go on the moon, mine this where it's much more plentiful, and then be able to bring it back down to Earth. So being able to deal with how you're going to mine these raw materials, how are you going to process them? And as far as finding out about helium-3, there are a number of sources that are available that can talk about that. And then obviously storage, since there's no way to instantaneously beam this stuff down to Earth. And if you remember when we talked about that transportation, launching landing pad kind of thing, it's going to have to be some method for them to plan on how they're going to get this back to Earth. Okay. Secondary mission, as I said, we just invented this one this year, and it's to come up with a lunar positioning system. And like good engineers, we wanted to at least give them a sense of what the accuracy requirements needed to be. And we're saying to be able to do accurate positioning, okay, within a 100-mile radius, so no further than that, but within a 100-mile radius of a given point. That doesn't mean they can't make it more accurate than that if they choose to. They may come up with a design that does that, okay? But it must be able to function with a single equipment failure. I'll just tell you right off, the notion we're trying to get to here is one that's really important when you're designing complex systems, and especially systems that have a potential safety ramification to them. You can imagine having somebody get lost 100 miles from a lunar base wouldn't be a feature if the system failed to operate in the face of a single equipment failure. For those of us that have spent most of our life working on airplane systems, that's a really big deal for us too. Okay? So single equipment failure, you've got to deal with that. We need drawings and descriptions of what's going to go on. Okay? And no use of what our engineering guys call unobtainium, which is a made-up substance that does whatever you want it to, okay? And they need to consider the unique aspects of the lunar environment. That's all I really want to say about that. Okay? We'll tell you if somebody comes and says, well, we're going to just use GPS satellites to figure out what our position is. That's probably not going to be a winning approach, okay? Written presentation, so here it's going to be cover the things that we've already talked about. The base design requirements, what are the physiological factors associated with being up on the moon, what are the societal factors, and then a textual description of what's involved in their design around executing that primary mission and the secondary mission. Okay? And so I'm going to hand it over to Keith here to talk about the judging and then talk about some, we've got a couple of photos of examples of bases to give people a feel that haven't seen them before. Any other questions though on what's going on? Okay, let me add one other thing before I turn it over to Keith. So every year I try to convey to the teacher coaches the importance of the role that you play in doing this, okay? And your job is teacher coach. One of the things that you can do to really help your kids get the most out of this exercise is to avoid the temptation to do their work for them. By their work for them, I don't just mean working on the project. I mean helping their learning. And here's what I'd like to suggest. When your kids come to you with questions, gosh, helium-3, what's that all about, right? And you may know. My suggestion is that you don't tell them what you know. You guide them. You act like a coach and you guide them to what they might do. Or if they're in the middle of a design discussion, because you certainly want to help them with those, but my recommendation is you help them by coaching them, by asking those open-ended questions in response to their questions as opposed to answering and guiding their thinking, right? Because that's what's going to help them say, oh, wow, so what should we do? How do we find out about how would we navigate on the moon? Well, how do what things do you know about navigation down on Earth? We don't know anything. Well, maybe you might want to start learning a little bit about navigation on Earth so you get an idea what just some of the concepts are for how you navigate. And then you can maybe look and see which ones of those some approach like that might have a play on the moon. And then we can, you can take a look and say, how do you balance one alternative against another? And we probably want to look up front at a couple of different ideas first, and we can figure out which one we want to do. Or we'll have maybe consider two, cooperative or complementary systems. Do you see what I'm saying? As opposed to telling them. And the temptation a lot of times may be to tell them. So I would strongly recommend that. I think the kids are going to get a whole lot more out of it. And with that, let me just add one more point, and then I'll hand it over to Keith. I think it's even part of our culture that competitions like this are just they can be a whole lot of fun. But I'm going to tell you, every year, the thing that really is kind of tough for me, both at the preliminaries, particularly at the finals. There's always a team that really feels bad if they don't do well. And so I coached Little League for a number of years. I've got twin boys, they're 23 now. But I coached them in Little League for a long time. And one of the things that I did as a Little League coach, I told parents, I said, look, if you guys want your kids on a team that's going to go to Little League World Series, this ain't the one, right? That's not where my focus is. My focus is to help these kids learn about the fundamentals of the game. I want them to learn about teamwork, and I want them to have a really good time. Okay, but I want to do all three of those things. And so, I guess what I'm really saying is, when you're interacting with your kids, what I found is, certainly at this age and even younger, in Little League, you never had to get kids pumped up to be competitive. They were already competitive. In fact, if anything, the coach needed to kind of got that, right? What's the score, coach? Even in T-ball, I mean, Jiminy Christmas, kids are 6 years old. They want to know what the score was when it's like 99 to 89. But all I'm really suggesting is that it's a competition that can, if it's done right, can really bring out the best in kids as individuals and also create a lot of cohesive teamwork and a lot of motivation to do well. And I would just encourage you to make sure that stays in that, kind of in that positive lane and doesn't turn into something that ends up being not productive and not focused on the primary mission of this competition, which is to get kids to learn and to get them fired up about this kind of technology and this kind of project.
We've got these categories here, and you see we've changed the secondary mission. That's worth 25 points out of 200, so 12.5%. That's intentional because it randomizes things. In terms of judging, we've got a judge for each of these categories. It makes the judge's life easier if the students, when they have a written presentation, to divide it up into these categories. If I'm the society judge, they have a 3-ring binder, it's tab society, I open it up and I look at it. Essentially, the judges are looking for information. They're looking for the children displaying a knowledge of that information. An example I give is that, well, actually the one that Bob gave about we're going to put a force field around the station. You know, there's not much thought in that. The one I give each year is a team that I was really impressed with a few years ago. They said, okay, each astronaut needs 3,000 calories. 3,000 calories weighs about 1 pound. 1 pound is about this size. So they worked out how big their freezer was, how big their storage locker was for the number of people in the station. And they did the calculation. Now, I'm not saying the calculation has to be right, but the fact they took the effort to put down their assumptions. We need us to put down the assumptions. It shows that they thought about it. So putting down some clarifying statements, even if they don't have the answer, say what they were trying to do and the assumptions behind it, is very, very useful. It shows that they've worked hard on it. Okay, so we're looking for creativity, originality, and research. As Bob alluded to, people think of this as a science project. It's not. It's more than a science project. It's meant to include arts as well, which is why we have society and all the other categories. We've had some winning teams here. About 5-6 years ago, we had 5th graders enter for the first time. They were homeschooled. I must admit, about that height. All the other kids were up here. They won. They were hands down. They had spent the time. So, teams can spend up to $50 maximum. There was a case last year where this poor, poor in the sense, coach called up and said, we've hit our $50 limit, do we have to have a card, a board at the back? And what we said in the end was, if you recycle one from the previous year, you can use it. I mean, this person was really trying to sit within the $50 limit. We stress the use of computers, mobile devices, etc. not permitted. You come along with an iPad with nice flash displays and graphics, we're going to ignore it. We're not necessarily penalising because we're going to brief the judges to totally ignore any aids. Now, within the $50, we've had children who come up with LED lights and batteries and flashing runway lights for
motors, all kinds of stuff.
Motors, you can do that within your $50. So, use of recycled materials. A lot of coaches, they go around, if they've coached before, they collect bits and pieces, you know, bottles, cartons, all sorts of things throughout the year for the children to use. So here are some examples. Not, quite frankly, not necessarily the best, but they are examples of this. And one of the practical things, as we said, stop on this one a second, is that, you know, it sounds really engineering if you say metre by metre by metre. It's 39 inches and just over 39.25 inches. But there are practical limits, and not only is it a matter of getting in the door, but fitting on a table and not overhanging too much. So there's no extra points for having the biggest model. The extra points are for having something that's creative. Now this one here is an example. I don't think it's the best example, I need to find better ones, but this is where they've taken various categories of their thing and they've spelt it out. What's the previous one look like, Peter? Yes, okay, so this one here. This is where they've taken some of their books and they've done it. So as a judge, I can come along, and that's a bit out of, I can't read that, it's a bit out of focus, but whatever that category is, if I was a judge, I could get an overview from that. We only have 3 to 5 minutes. Get an overview of what they're saying, We'll ask about this thing, we'll look at the book and get some information from that and ask them questions from that. The other thing is that the winning teams are those which everybody contributes. As a judge, if you go to a team and one child is answering all the questions, at the very least I would say to them, what was your contribution? What was your responsibility? What did you do? And encourage them. Because some are shy, we understand that. But the teams that go to finals, each team member has to participate in a 10-minute presentation. And what they tend to do is they tend to take a role. You know, I was the chief science officer, I was the medical officer, I was something like that. And that's what their speciality is. So when they're asked questions, that's what. So another way of doing it is think about dividing the team up so each one has a specific role and something to research. You can research together, but one person is responsible maybe for just documenting it and following through on that. As one philosophy.
Keith, let me add something just to reinforce what you said about the value of having some method, and it can be whatever method you want, of having a visual textual summary in addition to the notebook that's going to be there. So there'll be more than one judge at each table, okay, or going to each project as we go from one table to another. Typically 2 to 3, and then we have some floating judges that'll do just like secondary mission and that kind of thing. So we'll have general judges that'll go around, we'll have some other judges. So one of the things that's helpful is if one of the judges in a judging pair is asking some questions, the other one can be looking at some of the other things that are on the display. Okay, do you see what I mean? So that it's very helpful to have the project and have the display board convey high level wise what some of the information is. That helps the judges ask pointed questions, or when one of the judges is asking a question, one can be looking at this and then they can pick up the book and then go look for something that they think's of interest and then ask questions appropriately.
The top 6 teams, so there's 3 days of primary competition. So there's 2 teams from each of those days will go forward to the finals. One thing that's important that we enforced a few years ago is if you are a finalist, we take and store your model and your materials. For obvious reasons, you can't enhance it. Now, in the time you're waiting for the finals, obviously you polish your presentation. You can't add to it, but in general, when we come to the finals, we've instituted a pre-finals review of the station model and the materials the judges will look at and get some points for that. But the majority is on the actual presentation. Do they clearly define the goals and the missions and how the station works? Do they have a good understanding? The judges will spend several minutes asking questions live to the children to the competitors on the stage. So that's an interesting exercise. Up the pointing system, so you go 1 to 5 points pre-judging. So the finals normally start at 9 o'clock. Around 8:30 to 9, the judges will go around and review the models and the material as presented at the preliminaries and give 1 to 5 points, and then up to 31 points for the oral presentation. Part of those points are, do you stay within the 10-minute limit? Less than 10 minutes is okay, over 10 minutes you get penalised. So the teams practice their role and their presentation.
I would say most of the teams we've seen, and I'm guessing this goes back even more than the 5 years that I've been involved, their presentations are not just practice, they're choreographed,
Yes.
right? They're tight.
Yes.
And they have to have that level of dedication if they're going to really come off well.
Yes.
Does one person give the presentation or each member of the team?
Every team member.
These
So if there's 5 in a
somehow.
team, they all participate notionally equally. They generally stand up, they introduce themselves, and then they talk about the topic. And let's say, our expectation is it's to be relatively balanced. Obviously, we don't time into the second, but we expect them all to contribute.
So you can let your kids know, right? Some of them are going to be much more nervous about this than others in terms of talking if they end up making it to the finals. And it's not just about showmanship. On the other hand, a team that's really tight, that has great presentation skills, that counts for a lot. But again, we're going back to this whole notion of learning. You get a kid that would rather shoot themselves than be in public, that makes it to the finals, that gets a chance to do it. You know, the flip side is, even if they don't win, they have a chance to do it again next year.
So, all participants receive a t-shirt. Remember, they're going to be about 3 months older and bigger. So make sure you get a size that fits in 3 months, not now. A certificate and a program. Finalists receive a team plaque. And there are 12 honourable mention prizes for each day. We've got honourable mention judges going around, so it's the space station most like to live on, etc., etc. And the 18 Kids' Choice Awards, 6 each day, my best station name, etc. VIP trip to somewhere, I don't think it's been decided yet, has it?
No, it has not.
But all the trips in the past have been very well worth it. What is KATZ-TV?
So it's a local, it's on cable, it's, I believe it's channel 7 or 13, and they're a new partner with us this year, and they will be interviewing the winning team after the final competition, and so they'll air that on their morning scramble show. Either it's a live segment in their studio, or they'll tape something and they'll air it at a later date.
You know, you got 30 kids. When you stand back, kind of look at the mission for this, you're part of a bigger school, right? There's got to be somebody you can talk to.
No,
That's the
we're actually
principal or
really small.
what's that?
We're very small.
But
So,
how many teachers you got?
I'm the only 7th and 8th grade science teacher.
That wouldn't have to be
But
seven. Wouldn't have to be
teachers,
science
like,
team. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. But my point really is this: if you've got that level of interest at your school, it seems to me you have a great case to make to your school's administration and to your peers to say, you guys, I need help. We should not scale this down based on there being only one me. We should scale it up because there's all this interest, and our job here is to educate the kids.
And I don't know what your administrators like, but I've been through 3 in the 10 years that I've been at. And they've all been very interested in
Yeah,
it.
very
They
excited.
all would come down to ASU's West Campus, and when it was at the Challenger, they would go there. And talk to your administrator, especially in a small school. This is a great PR event for them.
It is.
Well, I have one student who actually, I think they made it to the finals. So he kind of freaked me out because he's like, it's so much work, don't take more than one team because it's
No,
all
it's
this
not
work,
your
all this
no,
time.
It's,
you have to put
You're a
in.
coach.
It's not your work.
You
It's
have
their
to-
work.
You have to spread the load, but I have seen there was one coach had 19 teams, and I don't know how they did it, but you could tell because, I mean, we ask questions because as a judge, we're going to ask questions. And you go to the next team and the material's the same, and they had one bad fact that was wrong, every team had it. I mean, it was tough, it was unfortunate that these teams, it was a learning experience. But, you know, some coaches have multiple teams, but they have some parent support to help them out. You can't do it on your own, but I wouldn't hold the children back if they're interested.
Yeah.